Yeah, I mean, sampling is interesting. That's an interesting topic. There's a lot of places you can perform sampling in a
Hmm.
tracing system, and Dapper performed it almost in every one of them.
Hmm.
But yeah, Dapper had actually pretty aggressive sampling. We started with 1 for 1,024, so just the, that was the base sampling rate in Dapper. And
Hmm.
then we realized that even after that, cut of 1 for 1,000, centralizing the data, when we initially we wrote the data just to local disk where we wrote log files, and we deployed a daemon that ran on every host at Google as root,
Hmm.
actually.
Hmm.
By the way, if you ever want to like jump through some hoops, try to deploy a new piece of software that runs as root on every machine at Google. I'll tell you that was a real nightmare from a
Hmm.
process standpoint. But anyway, so this thing would sit there, it would scan the log files and basically do a binary search anytime someone was looking for a trace. And so that's the thing that I started with. That was honestly a terrible way to build that system, really, really bad. So eventually we moved to a model where we would try to centralize that data somewhere for all the reasons you might imagine. But it turned out that the network cost of centralizing that data, even after the 1 for 1,000 cut, was substantial, and the storage costs were also really substantial. So we did another 1 for 10 on top of the 1 for 1,000. So we were doing 1 for 10,000 sampling totally
Hmm.
randomly
Hmm.
before we got to the central store that was used for things like map reduces and stuff like that. And it was, you know, pretty much means you can never use Dapper for all sorts of applications. Like for web
Hmm.
search, it was fine because I don't remember the number, but it was order of like 1 million queries per
Hmm.
second. So fine, whatever.
Hmm.
But for something like, I don't know, just making it up, like Google Checkout, where people are actually buying stuff, it's of
Hmm.
course intrinsically a much lower throughput
Hmm.
service, but the transactions are actually more valuable. So you're getting
Hmm.
cut both ways. And we didn't have a dynamic sampling mechanism on
Hmm.
Dapper when I was working there, and people could adjust those sampling rates themselves, but they usually didn't. So, yeah, the technology was really not that useful except for
Hmm.
the high throughput services where that sampling wasn't a complete deal breaker. I think with Lightstep and with other systems that have been written in the last couple of years, there's a recognition that sampling really serves a couple of purposes. One is to protect the system from
Hmm.
itself. So you don't want to have an observer effect and actually create latency
Hmm.
through tracing. With Dapper, we had that issue because we wrote to local disk. We're
Hmm.
basically entering the kernel at least on disk flush. And for hosts that were doing a lot of disk activity, we could actually create latency
Hmm.
with high sampling percentages. But there's no need to do that. I mean, you can just flush the stuff over the network, and
Hmm.
especially that was 2005. Networks are a lot faster now. NICs are a lot faster now. You can actually get the data out of the process without sampling in almost all situations. I mean, there are
Hmm.
probably an outlier cases here or there. It's not true, but overall, there's no issue with flushing all the data out of the process. And then you just need to decide how much you're willing to spend on network and how much you're willing to spend on storage. And so, and that's a whole set of other constraints. The other thing that I recognize is that long-term storage is quite cheap. The network, wide area networking costs in terms of the lifetime of that data end up being almost as expensive, or in many cases more expensive than storing it for a year.
Hmm.
So if you can find some way to push the storage closer to the application itself, even if it's just in the same physical building or availability zone, that's a pretty big win as well. So a lot of the work that we've done at Lightstep is actually trying to take advantage of some of those, just trying to be on the right side of those cost curves
Hmm. Hmm.
in terms of where we actually do the high throughput ingest
Yeah.
and then where we do the sampling and stuff like
Yeah.
that.